See, my mule don't like people laughing. It's the crazy idea you're laughing at him.
When you think of Hollywood's golden age, few genres capture the American spirit like the Western. It wasn't just about gunfights and dusty saloons. It was about larger-than-life stars who defined toughness, honor, and sometimes rebellion. These actors shaped the way generations imagined the frontier, leaving behind legends that still echo today. But behind the hats and horses were stories of struggle, scandal, and triumph. Let's count down the top 10 old Western actors in Hollywood history. Robert Mitchum wasn't your typical Hollywood leading man. With his sleepy-eyed gaze and rugged demeanor, he brought a sense of danger to the screen that most Western stars avoided. While he's often remembered for his film noir classics like Out of the Past and The Night of the Hunter, Mitchum also carved a permanent place in Western history by redefining what a cowboy could look like. He wasn't polished, he wasn't always noble, and that's exactly why audiences couldn't look away. Mitchum's early life was just as restless as the drifters he played. Expelled from school and wandering the country during the Depression, he knew firsthand the hard edges of survival. That grit carried into his performances, making his outlaws and anti-heroes feel authentic in a way few actors could match. He started with small roles in Hopalong Cassidy films before breaking out with meatier Western parts that showcased his quiet intensity. But perhaps the moment that cemented Mitchum's outlaw reputation came in 1948, when he was arrested for marijuana possession. At a time when such a scandal could have ended a career, Mitchum somehow turned it into fuel for his legend. Instead of damaging his reputation, it reinforced the rebellious image fans already loved. Suddenly, Mitchum wasn't just playing outsiders, he was one. His performances in films like River of No Return, alongside Marilyn Monroe, and El Dorado with John Wayne, proved his range. Whether playing a morally conflicted drifter or a menacing gunslinger, Mitchum always carried an unpredictability that kept audiences hooked. He made the Western darker, edgier, and far more human. Mitchum may not have had the clean-cut heroism of Gary Cooper or John Wayne, but that was his strength. He embodied the gray areas of the frontier, where good and bad often blurred. And in doing so, he helped change Westerns forever. James "Jimmy" Stewart might be best remembered as the warm-hearted George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, but his impact on the Western genre was just as enduring. Known for his gentle drawl and everyman charm, Stewart brought something new to the frontier: humanity. Where others played larger-than-life heroes, Stewart often portrayed flawed men struggling with morality, revenge, and redemption. And that contrast made his Westerns unforgettable. After establishing himself in comedies and dramas during the 1930s, Stewart's career shifted following his service as a decorated bomber pilot in World War II. The war left him older, harder, and with a perspective that audiences could sense on screen. When he returned to Hollywood, Stewart embraced grittier, darker roles, and nowhere was this transformation more evident than in his Westerns. His collaborations with director Anthony Mann created some of the most riveting frontier films ever made. In Winchester 73, Stewart played a haunted sharpshooter consumed by revenge. In Bend of the River and The Naked Spur, his characters wrestled with moral compromises that mirrored America's shifting attitudes after the war. He wasn't just the good guy, he was a man trying to survive in a world where right and wrong weren't always clear. Gregory Peck may forever be etched in history as Atticus Finch, the principled lawyer in To Kill a Mockingbird, but his contributions to the Western genre deserve just as much recognition. With his tall frame, commanding presence, and deep voice, Peck brought a unique gravitas to the dusty frontier. Yet what made him fascinating was how he often subverted expectations, sometimes portraying noble gunslingers, and other times shocking audiences as a cold-blooded villain. First major Western appearance came in Duel in the Sun, 1946, where he played against type as a cruel, manipulative cowboy. The role stunned audiences who were used to seeing him as a symbol of integrity. But it also proved his versatility and showed that Westerns weren't just about clear-cut heroes and villains, they could explore the darker side of human nature. In The Gunfighter, 1950, Peck portrayed Jimmy Ringo, an aging gunslinger haunted by his reputation and desperate for peace. It was one of his finest performances, showing a man crushed under the weight of his own legend. Critics have since hailed the film as one of the first to portray the psychological toll of life in the Old West. Though he worried about being typecast as a Western star, Peck couldn't resist returning to the genre in films like The Bravados and the sprawling epic How the West Was Won. Each performance carried the same intelligence and quiet intensity that made him one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Off-screen, Peck was just as commanding. Outspoken against the House Un-American Activities Committee, he challenged political witch hunts in the late 1940s and later received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his humanitarian work. That moral backbone bled into his screen roles. Even when he played flawed men, audiences could feel the weight of conscience behind his eyes. Gregory Peck wasn't the most prolific cowboy on this list, but he was one of the most memorable. His westerns reminded viewers that the frontier wasn't only about duels and dust, it was about the human condition itself. Henry Fonda may not have looked like the stereotypical gunslinger, but his quiet strength and moral clarity made him one of the most respected actors ever to ride across the silver screen. Early in his career, Fonda was the embodiment of the good guy. With his calm demeanor and tall, lean frame, he projected the kind of integrity that audiences associated with justice and decency. In films like My Darling Clementine, 1946, where he played the legendary lawman Wyatt Earp, Fonda defined the noble sheriff archetype. But as his career progressed, Fonda shattered that image by taking on roles that revealed a far darker side. In Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968, director Sergio Leone cast him as the ruthless killer Frank. When Fonda appeared on screen, calmly gunning down an innocent family, audiences were stunned. For decades, he had been the face of decency, and suddenly, he was evil personified. It was one of the most shocking pieces of casting in Western history, and it proved Fonda's range was far greater than many had realized. His versatility is what makes Fonda so unique among Western actors. He could embody the moral compass of a frontier town just as easily as he could become the monster lurking in its shadows. That duality gave his career a depth few others achieved. Off-screen, Fonda's influence stretched beyond the Western. He was the patriarch of a Hollywood dynasty, with children Jane and Peter Fonda and granddaughter Bridget all following in his footsteps. In his final years, he delivered one of his most touching performances in On Golden Pond, 1981, which won him the Academy Award for Best Actor. Henry Fonda proved that the West wasn't just about black hats and white hats. It was about the human struggle between good and evil. A struggle he captured on screen with unmatched authenticity. Lee Van Cleef didn't need many words to make an impression. One look at his piercing eyes, sharp cheekbones, and menacing grin told audiences everything they needed to know. This was a man you didn't want to cross. While some Western stars built their careers on playing noble heroes, Van Cleef became iconic as one of cinema's most unforgettable villains. His Hollywood journey started modestly. After serving in the U.S. Navy during World War II, Van Cleef worked in theater before landing small roles in film. His first major screen appearance came in High Noon, 1952, where he played a silent henchman. Though he had no dialogue, his intimidating presence stood out. For the next decade, he became typecast in minor villain roles until a devastating car accident nearly ended his career altogether. But fate had other plans. Italian director Sergio Leone saw potential in Van Cleef's commanding presence and cast him opposite Clint Eastwood in For a Few Dollars More, 1965. The film revitalized his career overnight, making him an international star. He went on to cement his legacy in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, as Angel Eyes, one of the most chilling outlaws in movie history. Van Cleef's icy stare, calculated movements, and effortless menace elevated him from side character to legend. Unlike John Wayne or Gary Cooper, Van Cleef wasn't the symbol of the all-American hero. Instead, he represented the darker, grittier side of the West, the corruption, greed, and violence lurking beneath the surface. And that made him essential to the genre's evolution. Spaghetti westerns thrived on blurred morality, and Van Cleef was their perfect face of menace. Even as his later career slowed, Van Cleef continued to work steadily in westerns and action films leaving behind more than 150 screen credits. His legacy is proof that you don't have to be the good guy to become unforgettable. Sometimes the villain steals the show, and Van Cleef did it better than almost anyone. Gary Cooper was the strong, silent type, the man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. Tall, lean, and ruggedly handsome, he embodied the very image of the classic Western hero. Cooper wasn't flashy, and he didn't rely on exaggerated mannerisms. Instead, he gave audiences something more powerful: authenticity. He looked and moved like a man who truly belonged on the frontier, and that made him one of the most enduring figures in Western history. Cooper's career began in the silent film era, where he started out as a stunt rider and extra in low-budget cowboy pictures. His natural ease on horseback and understated screen presence quickly set him apart. By the late 1920s, he had transitioned into leading roles, and when sound films arrived, his quiet, deliberate style fit the Western mold perfectly. One of his earliest triumphs came with The Virginian, 1929, where he delivered the famous line, "When you call me that, smile." The role established Cooper as Hollywood's go-to cowboy. Over the decades, he built a reputation for playing men of principle, characters who stood firm in the face of danger, often with little more than a calm stare and a steady gun hand. But Cooper's defining performance came in High Noon, 1952. As Marshal Will Kane, he played a lawman abandoned by his town and left to face a deadly gang alone. The film's tension unfolds in real time, and Cooper's weary, haunted performance earned him an Academy Award. Beyond its thrilling story, High Noon became a metaphor for courage and duty, reflecting Cold War anxieties and cementing Cooper as more than just an action star. He was a symbol of integrity. Though he acted in a variety of genres, it was the Western that made Gary Cooper immortal. He wasn't just playing cowboys, he was playing the embodiment of America's idealized hero, stoic, brave, and quietly noble. Glenn Ford may not always be the first name people think of when Westerns are mentioned, but his contributions to the genre were massive. Known for his versatility, Ford excelled in dramas, thrillers, and even comedies. But it was his Western work that carved out his reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable leading men. What made him special was his ability to portray ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances, a quality that made his cowboys feel far more real than the typical rugged hero. Born in Canada and raised in California, Ford grew up with a fascination for acting and quickly made his way into Hollywood. He got his start in small studio pictures before landing breakout roles in films like Texas, 1941, with William Holden. By the 1950s, he had become a household name, and his Westerns showcased his quiet intensity and understated charm. One of Ford's greatest claims to fame was his reputation as the fastest gun in Hollywood. It was said he could draw and fire a pistol in 4/10 of a second, faster even than John Wayne or James Arness of Gunsmoke fame. That quick draw skill added authenticity to films like The Fastest Gun Alive, 1956, where Ford's character struggles with the burden of being the quickest shot. Another standout was 3:10 to Yuma, 1957, where Ford delivered a mesmerizing performance as outlaw Ben Wade. Rather than playing Wade as a one-note villain, Ford gave him layers of charm, cunning, and ruthlessness, creating one of the most complex characters in Western cinema. His ability to balance menace with charisma set a new standard for the genre. Though Ford acted in over 100 films across multiple genres, his Westerns remain his most lasting legacy. Inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame, he left behind a body of work that captured both the grit and humanity of the Old West. Glenn Ford didn't just play cowboys, he played men audiences believed could have truly existed on the frontier. If John Wayne was the face of the Western, Randolph Scott was its backbone. For decades, Scott defined the image of the quiet, stoic cowboy who didn't need to say much to command respect. Tall, rugged, and steady, he embodied the kind of Western hero that audiences trusted. Dependable, unshakable, and seemingly born in the saddle. Scott's career began in the early 1930s, when he made the leap from stage work to the silver screen. He started with small roles, often in historical dramas, before finding his true calling in westerns. By the mid-1930s, Scott had become one of Hollywood's most reliable cowboy stars, appearing in a string of films that helped establish him as a household name. Over the years, he built a resume of more than 60 westerns, far more than many of his contemporaries. What set Scott apart was his natural authenticity. Unlike some stars who looked out of place on horseback, Scott appeared completely at home in the saddle, and his calm, deliberate screen presence made him a perfect fit for the genre. He didn't play loud, brash gunslingers. He played men of quiet strength, often caught in moral dilemmas where courage and honor meant more than quick-draw skills. In the 1950s, Scott teamed with director Bud Boetticher for a series of low-budget westerns that are now considered classics. Films like Ride Lonesome, 1959, and The Tall T, 1957, stripped the western down to its bare essentials: a lone rider, a moral conflict, and the harsh frontier landscape. Critics later hailed these films as some of the most realistic and thoughtful westerns ever made. Off-screen, Scott was known for his financial acumen. Through smart investments, he became one of the wealthiest actors in Hollywood, eventually retiring comfortably. Despite his fortune, he avoided the spotlight, preferring a quiet life away from the chaos of show business. Randolph Scott may not have been as flashy as Clint Eastwood or as iconic as John Wayne, but he was the steady heartbeat of the Western genre. His work gave the cowboy image dignity, simplicity, and timeless strength. Few actors reshaped the image of the cowboy like Clint Eastwood. Where earlier Western stars often represented nobility or patriotism, Eastwood embodied something far more complex. A hardened loner, a man of few words whose moral code was murky at best. His Westerns weren't about black and white heroes. They were about survival, revenge, and the blurred lines of justice. And in redefining the cowboy, Eastwood became one of the most iconic actors in Hollywood history. Eastwood's breakthrough came in the 1960s, when Italian director Sergio Leone cast him as the man with no name in the Dollars trilogy. A Fistful of Dollars, 1964, For a Few Dollars More, 1965, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, weren't just popular. They revolutionized the Western. With their gritty realism, stylized violence, and morally ambiguous characters, these films gave audiences a new vision of the frontier, and Eastwood's cold stare and calm ruthlessness made him unforgettable. Returning to America, Eastwood continued his Western legacy with films like Hang 'em High, 1968, High Plains Drifter, 1973, and The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976. Unlike many stars who relied solely on their acting, Eastwood soon stepped behind the camera, directing several of his own westerns. His work as both actor and director added depth to the genre, exploring themes of vengeance, redemption, and the psychological scars of violence. The pinnacle of his Western career came with Unforgiven, 1992. Playing a retired gunslinger drawn back into a life of bloodshed, Eastwood delivered a raw, sobering portrait of the cowboy myth. The film won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, cementing Eastwood's place as not just a Western star, but one of cinema's greatest storytellers. Even in his later years, Eastwood has returned to the Western, with films like Pale Rider and Cry Macho, showing his lifelong connection to the genre. His contribution wasn't just in the characters he played, but in the way he forced audiences to confront the darker truths of the frontier. Clint Eastwood didn't just star in Westerns, he reinvented them. When it comes to old Western actors, no name looms larger than John Wayne. Known simply as the Duke, Wayne wasn't just a movie star. He was the living embodiment of the American cowboy. With his towering frame, gravelly voice, and commanding presence, Wayne became the face of the Western genre for generations. For many audiences, he didn't just play cowboys, he was the cowboy. Wayne's career began in the 1920s, working as a prop boy and extra before earning small parts in silent films. His big break came in 1939 with John Ford's Stagecoach, which catapulted him to stardom. From then on, Wayne dominated the screen, appearing in nearly 250 films, many of them westerns. His collaborations with Ford, including She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 1949, and The Searchers, 1956, are now regarded as some of the greatest westerns ever made. What made Wayne so iconic was his larger-than-life persona. He played men who were strong, determined, and unwavering in the face of danger. Yet there was also a humanity to his performances, whether as the vengeful Ethan Edwards in The Searchers or the weary sheriff in Rio Bravo. Wayne conveyed both toughness and vulnerability. His role as Rooster Cogburn in True Grit, 1969, finally won him an Academy Award, showcasing the grizzled charm that defined his later career. Off-screen, Wayne was just as polarizing. A staunch conservative, he became a vocal political figure, supporting causes that sometimes drew criticism. Yet even those who disagreed with him couldn't deny his cultural impact. His rugged image and patriotic persona made him a symbol of traditional American values, for better or worse. Wayne's final years were marked by serious health battles, including lung and stomach cancer, but he never lost his iconic status. He was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, further cementing his legacy. For millions of moviegoers, John Wayne wasn't just an actor, he was the West itself. His name remains synonymous with the genre, and his shadow continues to stretch across Hollywood history like the endless frontier he once ruled. From Robert Mitchum's rebellious edge to John Wayne's towering legacy, these 10 old Western actors defined an era that continues to shape Hollywood today. Each brought something unique to the screen, whether it was Jimmy Stewart's vulnerability, Gregory Peck's gravitas, Henry Fonda's duality, or Clint Eastwood's reinvention of the entire genre. Together, they turned the Western into more than just entertainment. They made it a myth, a reflection of America's ideals, fears, and contradictions. Though the genre has faded in popularity, its spirit endures. Every modern Western owes a debt to these legends who brought grit, heart, and humanity to the frontier. Their films remain timeless reminders of a Hollywood that built its heroes in dust and gunsmoke. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood tales.